A Turkey court has sentenced a Wall Street Journal reporter to 2 years and 1 month in prison. The government argued Ayla El-Bayrak engaged in terrorist propaganda. Miss Ayla was convicted in absentia. She's in New York. But it's another example of the Erdogan government cracking down on journalists and opposition in that country. Well, CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now with more from Jerusalem. Chris, what can you tell us about this journalist and why was she convicted by Turkey?
Well, she was convicted, Gary, because she wrote an article actually more than 2 years ago about the PKK, which is a Kurdish group in eastern Turkey that is considered by Erdogan to be a terrorist organization. Now, she wrote a pretty straightforward article about what was happening there in eastern Turkey, and yet they considered it, they meaning the Erdogan government, considered it propaganda. It's just one more sign of the Erdogan government cracking down on the media. Many people may not know that Turkey has more journalists in prison than any other nation in the world, including China. So he cracks down on anything that stands against his government's position.
Okay, Chris, what is he really trying to accomplish there by doing that?
I think it's a chilling reminder of what he's trying to do is just control all aspects of society. After the attempted coup that he accused Fethullah Gulen about, he's cracked down on the military, the judiciary, the journalists. He's just trying to control Turkey in all sorts of ways. So I think it's one more reminder of Erdogan trying to establish an authoritarian Islamist dictatorship there in Turkey.
Well, how should the U.S. respond?
Well, I think they should stand up against them. And I think that we know just in the last few days, there was a U.S. consulate official who was arrested by the Turkish government. In turn, the United States shut down visas to Turkish officials, which in turn, the Turkish government shut down visas for U.S. officials. So I think they need to stand up against Erdogan. For 8 years, President Obama really kowtowed, I think, to the Erdogan government. But I think the Trump administration is taking a bit of a stand here, and I think they should continue to stand up against Erdogan.
Chris, it does seem like there is a growing divide between Trump and Erdogan. Of course, a lot of people don't know Turkey is a NATO country. They're our partner.
That's right.
Now, this growing divide, first on ISIS and Syria and the Kurds, now this. What do you think's happening? Where will this lead?
Well, I think finally the Trump administration, like I said, is standing up against them. And one thing we need to remember, Gary, is that there's a pastor, an American pastor, Andrew Brunson, that's in prison right now, and he's really become a political pawn used by Erdogan against the United States. He would like to try to swap Andrew Brunson for a man named Gulen, who's in Pennsylvania right now, and Erdogan is accusing Gulen of trying to have a coup and overthrow his government. And I think this is he's using Brunson as a political pawn. People really need to be praying for the release of this pastor who's been jailed unnecessarily, just as Erdogan is trying to use some sort of leverage against the United States. But I think the U.S., hopefully the Trump administration will stand tall against Erdogan.
Human bargaining chips, right, Chris?
Exactly.
And we know that Erdogan recently made a trip to Iran. He met with the Ayatollah and President Rouhani there. What was the significance of that visit?
I think it's very significant, and part of it is because you have to look at the Kurdish referendum just a few days ago on September 25th. We were up there in Erbil reporting on that, and the Kurdish regional government in northern Iraq would like their independence. And the concern that Turkey and Iran share about that is that they both have large Kurdish populations within their borders. There's about 30 million Kurds in the region, maybe about 5 or 6 million in northern Iraq, but millions more in both Turkey and Iran. And they don't want to see an independent Kurdistan, lest their own Kurdish populations try to become independent as well. So I think they're having a joint strategy against this idea of independence of the Kurdish people. The Baghdad government has shut down the airport. I talked to a Kurdish official not too long ago that said they were doing military exercises on the Turkish border. There were Iranian tanks on the Iranian Kurdish border. So they're trying to intimidate the Kurds in northern Iraq, lest their own populations try to get their own independence.
Squeezing Barzani a little bit, I think, as well, because they see him as an ally of Israel.
Exactly. And in fact, in the referendum, Israel was the only country really to come out for Kurdish independence. The Trump administration, I think, tragically, really hasn't supported this idea of independence. They're going with this one Iraq policy that Iraq shouldn't be divided in any way. But the Kurds really are a natural ally to the United States, to the West, and especially Israel. Israel has a really affinity with the Kurds. Many Kurdish Jews had to flee one time from Saddam Hussein. They ended up here in Israel. So they would be one more ally here in the West if there could be an independent Kurdistan.
And I'm sure Israel's very concerned and had a close eye on that meeting between the Ayatollah and Erdogan.
For sure. And when I was up there in Kurdistan, Gary, there was a big concern that Iran was trying to get what they call the Shiite arc or crescent or corridor all the way from Iran to the Mediterranean. We saw the increased presence of Shiite militias funded and armed by Iran up there in northern Iraq. And that's a concern that many people have, that once ISIS is finally defeated in that region, that Iran and these Shiite militias are going to fill the vacuum, posing one more threat, not only to Christians in the area, but the Kurds as well.
Okay, Chris Mitchell, I'm sure you'll keep a close eye on it. We appreciate you being there to follow this, and I know you'll update us. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Gary.